The morning sky over Port Meridian held that peculiar copper tinge that sailors learn to distrust. Vincent Reeves stood on the weathered dock, coffee mug warming his calloused hands, watching clouds gather on the distant horizon like an army preparing for invasion. The weather vane atop his boathouse spun erratically, unable to decide which direction the wind preferred. It didn't matter. Vincent had checked the marine forecast 3 times since dawn. Hurricane Ophelia was coming, and she was bringing the kind of fury that turned coastlines into memories. Behind him, the Constellation creaked softly against her moorings, a 40-foot schooner that had seen better decades. Her hull bore the scars of neglect and weather, paint peeling in long strips that reminded Vincent of old wallpaper in abandoned houses. For 3 years, he'd been restoring her, working with the methodical patience of a man who had nowhere else to be and nothing but time. Every plank he replaced, every rope he spliced, every inch of canvas he repaired was a conversation with ghosts. Thomas had bought the boat 15 years ago, before the cancer, before the hospital rooms that smelled of antiseptic and false hope. They'd planned to sail around the world together, just the two of them in the open ocean. Vincent could still hear his husband's voice, bright with excitement as they'd stood on this very dock, Thomas pointing at the horizon and listing all the places they'd visit. The Greek islands, the coast of Madagascar, the hidden harbors of New Zealand where the water ran so clear you could see straight to the bottom. But cancer doesn't care about dreams. Thomas never made it past the first round of chemotherapy. The Constellation sat unused for years, slowly deteriorating in her slip, until Vincent retired from the aerospace firm and found himself with empty days that echoed too loudly. The boat became his refuge, his purpose, his way of keeping Thomas close. Now the radio in the boathouse crackled with evacuation orders. The mayor's voice, strained with urgency, commanded all residents to move inland immediately. Hurricane Ophelia had intensified to Category 5, with sustained winds of 180 miles per hour. Storm surge predictions showed 20-foot waves that would swallow the harbor whole. The entire coastal district needed to evacuate within 6 hours. Vincent took another sip of coffee and stayed exactly where he was. The neighbors had left yesterday, their cars loaded with hastily packed belongings, their faces tight with worry. Old Miguel from the tackle shop had stopped by, gripping Vincent's shoulder with tobacco-stained fingers. "Don't be a fool, Vince. That boat ain't worth dying for." Vincent had thanked him and said nothing about how Miguel was wrong. The boat wasn't worth dying for, but the memories it contained, the last physical connection to the man he'd loved for 30 years, those were different. The dock swayed beneath his feet as the first serious waves rolled in. The water in the harbor had turned the color of steel, choppy and aggressive, slapping against pilings with increasing violence. Seagulls, usually so bold and numerous, had vanished entirely. Even they knew to run from what was coming. Vincent walked down to the Constellation, running his hand along her scarred hull. He'd reinforced the moorings, secured everything that could be secured, double-checked every knot and line. She wouldn't survive, probably, but he'd be with her when she went down. He was coiling a rope on deck when he heard it, a sharp, desperate sound cutting through the wind. A voice, calling for help. Vincent froze, listening. There it was again, coming from the direction of the Marine Research Station 3 docks over. The building was a squat concrete structure that jutted into the harbor, surrounded by equipment buoys and sensor arrays. It should have been evacuated days ago. Vincent moved quickly despite his 62 years, decades of physical work keeping him agile. He jogged along the swaying dock toward the research station. The tide was already rising, seawater sloshing across the planks and soaking through his boots. The voice came again, clearer now, female and frightened. He reached the station's entrance and found the door partially submerged, water pouring through the gap at the bottom. "Hello? Is someone there?" he shouted. "Yes, help!" "The door's jammed." The voice came from inside, muffled but close. Vincent grabbed the door handle and pulled. Nothing. The rising water had created pressure against it, and the old wood had swollen in its frame. He braced his foot against the wall and pulled harder, muscles straining. The door held for a moment, then burst open with a rush of water that nearly knocked him down. A woman stumbled out, soaked and shaking, carrying a waterproof case against her chest like it contained the crown jewels. She was younger than Vincent, maybe mid-30s, with dark hair plastered to her skull and ocean-colored eyes wide with a mixture of relief and residual terror. She wore jeans and a research station polo shirt, both dripping steadily onto the dock. "Thank God," she gasped. "I thought—" The water came up so fast and the door swelled shut and I couldn't— She paused, really looking at Vincent for the first time. "Wait, why are you still here?" "The evacuation order was hours ago. I could ask you the same question," Vincent replied, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. Another wave crashed against the pilings, sending spray high into the air. The dock lurched beneath them. "We need to move. Can you walk?" "Yes, I'm fine, just—" She clutched the case tighter. "I had to get the data. 5 years of ocean acidification research. If we lose this, we lose our only comprehensive record of reef degradation in this region. It's like humanity's last warning about what we're doing to the oceans." Vincent understood obsession, understood the things people couldn't leave behind even when logic demanded it. He nodded toward his boathouse. "Come on. We'll figure out the rest from there." They hurried back along the dock, the woman, she hadn't given her name yet, struggling to keep her balance as the planks heaved. The wind had picked up significantly in just the few minutes Vincent had been gone, now strong enough to push against them like invisible hands. The sky had darkened to the color of deep bruises. They reached the constellation, just as the rain began in earnest, not a gradual buildup, but an immediate deluge, as if someone had torn open the sky. Vincent helped the woman aboard, then quickly checked his preparations one final time. The boat rocked violently, straining against her moorings. "Get below," he told her, shouting to be heard over the wind. "There's dry clothes in the forward cabin and emergency supplies in the galley." She hesitated, looking around at the battered vessel with visible doubt. "Is this thing even seaworthy?" Vincent met her eyes, seeing the same fear he felt reflected there. "Honestly, we're about to find out." The first hour was almost manageable. Vincent secured the woman who'd finally introduced herself as Claire Donovan, oceanographer and apparent lunatic who prioritized data over her own life, in the main cabin while he worked topside. The rain came in sheets now, visibility reduced to mere feet. He could barely see the dock beside them, let alone the harbor beyond. The constellation bucked and heaved against her moorings like a wild animal testing its chains. Claire emerged from below wearing one of Thomas's old sweaters, rolled up at the sleeves and a pair of Vincent's work pants cinched tight with rope. Her hair was still wet but no longer dripping, pulled back in a practical ponytail. She carried 2 mugs of instant coffee, somehow managing not to spill them despite the boat's violent motion. "I figured you could use this," she said, handing him one. "Also, I should probably apologize for calling your boat a thing. She's beautiful in a weathered kind of way." Vincent accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping both hands around the mug. "Constellation. Her name's Constellation, and she's tougher than she looks." He hoped that was true. "You didn't have to stay behind for data, you know. Lives matter more than research." Claire's expression hardened slightly. "This data represents the last comprehensive baseline we have before the reefs collapse completely. Without it, we're sailing blind into environmental catastrophe. Sometimes data is the difference between extinction and survival." She paused, looking out at the chaos surrounding them. "My fiancé used to say I cared more about coral than people." Maybe he was right. "Used to?" Vincent asked gently. "He died 3 years ago. Diving accident during a research expedition in the Philippines. There was a sudden current, equipment failure, and he—" Her voice caught. "He pushed me toward the surface and went down for the backup tank. Never came back up." She stared into her coffee mug as if it held answers. "His name was Jonas. He was brilliant and reckless, and he loved the ocean more than anything except maybe me." Vincent understood that particular shade of grief, the kind that turned memories into both treasure and torture. "Thomas bought this boat 15 years ago, he said, surprising himself with the words. "My husband. We were going to sail the world together. Then cancer happened, and suddenly the world didn't seem so big anymore. Just hospital rooms and test results and watching someone you love disappear piece by piece." They stood in silence for a moment, 2 strangers bound by loss and poor decision-making. The wind howled around them, and somewhere in the distance came the sound of something large, a boat, a building. Impossible to tell, tearing apart. Then everything changed at once. A massive wave, easily 15 feet high, rolled through the harbor entrance. Vincent saw it coming, a wall of dark water topped with white foam, and screamed, "Hold on!" Claire dropped her mug and grabbed the railing just as the wave hit. The constellation rose up impossibly high, and Vincent felt his stomach drop. The mooring line screamed with tension. One snapped with a sound like a gunshot. Then another. The boat came down hard, slamming into the water with bone-jarring force. Vincent lost his footing and slid across the deck, only his grip on a cleat saving him from going overboard. When he looked up, the third mooring line was fraying, individual fibers popping one by one. "We're breaking loose," he shouted to Claire. "Get inside now." But she was already moving, not toward the cabin, but toward the helm. "We can't just drift."
"We'll smash into the rocks!"
She was right. The harbor was surrounded by a rocky breakwater that would tear the Constellation apart like tissue paper. Vincent's mind raced, decades of engineering training colliding with 3 years of amateur sailing knowledge. If they were breaking free anyway, they needed control. They needed to actually sail out into open water, insane as that sounded. "Can you handle the wheel?" he called to Claire. "I grew up on boats. My dad was a fisherman." "Then take the helm." Keep her pointed toward the harbor mouth. "I'm going to raise the storm jib." The last mooring line parted. Suddenly they were free, drifting sideways in the churning water, the boat tilting at a dangerous angle. Claire stumbled to the wheel and grabbed it with both hands, her knuckles white. Vincent moved forward, every step a battle against the pitching deck. The wind tried to tear him away, rain stinging his face like needles. He reached the mast and began working the lines. The storm jib was a small reinforced sail designed for exactly this kind of weather. His fingers, stiff and cold, fumbled with knots he'd practiced 1,000 times. Behind him he heard Claire shouting something, but the wind stole her words. He got the jib partially raised, and suddenly the boat had direction, purpose. The Constellation heeled hard to starboard, then caught herself, cutting through the water instead of being pushed by it. Vincent made his way back to the helm, gripping whatever he could reach. Claire's face was set in concentration, her whole body braced against the wheel. Together, they steered toward the harbor mouth, toward the open ocean that was somehow their best chance at survival. "This is insane," Claire shouted. "Completely." Vincent agreed. They cleared the breakwater with yards to spare, and suddenly they were in truly open water. The waves here were massive, rolling mountains of dark water that lifted the Constellation and dropped her into valleys 30 feet deep. But there was also room to maneuver, space to work with instead of being trapped in the harbor's confines. Hours blurred together. Vincent and Claire worked as a team, he calling out adjustments based on engineering instinct, she executing them with surprising skill. They bailed water, adjusted the sail, fought to keep the bow pointed into the waves. The boat took a beating, groaning and cracking, but she held together. Somewhere in the darkest part of the storm, when Vincent thought his arms might simply give out, Claire spoke over the roar. "Jonas used to say that the ocean doesn't care about your plans. You have to respect it, work with it, or it'll swallow you whole." She was crying, tears mixing with rain and spray. "I've been so angry at the ocean for taking him." "But staying angry won't bring him back. It just keeps me from living." Vincent understood. He'd spent 3 years hiding in restoration work, talking to ghosts instead of people, trying to preserve something that was already gone. Thomas wouldn't have wanted that. Thomas had loved life, loved adventure, loved the idea of new horizons. Thomas used to tell me that love wasn't about calm seas. Vincent shouted back. It was about choosing to sail together through whatever came. I forgot that. I thought keeping the boat was the same as keeping him, but he's not in the wood and canvas. He's in here. He pressed his fist against his chest. And being afraid to lose again means I already have. Lightning split the sky, illuminating Claire's face. She was looking at him with an expression he hadn't seen in years. Understanding, connection, recognition of shared humanity. In that moment, two broken people saw each other clearly. The mast gave a terrible crack. They both looked up in horror as the wooden spar split halfway up, the storm jib tearing free and disappearing into the darkness. The boat wallowed, losing her stability. "We need a sea anchor," Vincent yelled. "Something to keep our bow into the wind." They worked frantically, tying together spare line and anything with weight. Anchors, chain, even the galley table once they'd wrenched it free. They deployed their makeshift sea anchor off the bow, and slowly, agonizingly, the Constellation steadied. She sat lower in the water now, damaged and taking on water faster than the bilge pump could handle. But she was positioned to survive. Vincent and Claire collapsed against each other in the cockpit, exhausted beyond measure. Without thinking, he put his arm around her shoulders. Without hesitation, she leaned into him. Two strangers thrown together by stubbornness and fate, finding comfort in shared survival. "If we live through this," Claire said quietly. "I'm taking you to dinner," Vincent laughed, a sound he'd almost forgotten how to make. "If we live through this, I'll cook you dinner. Fair warning, though, I'm a terrible cook." "That's okay," Claire replied. "I'm an excellent cook." We balance out. The eye of the storm found them near dawn, a circle of relative calm and impossible stars above. They were too exhausted to speak, but they didn't let go of each other either. The silence woke Vincent. After hours of wind that screamed like a living thing, after waves that crashed with the force of artillery, the sudden quiet felt wrong, almost threatening. He opened his eyes to find himself still in the cockpit, his body stiff and aching, Claire's head resting against his shoulder. She was asleep, her breathing soft and steady, one hand still clutching a section of rope as if she didn't trust the calm. Vincent carefully extracted himself and stood, his knees protesting. The constellation floated in water that looked like hammered silver barely moving. Around them stretched an endless expanse of ocean, no land visible in any direction. The sky above was washed clean, pale blue with streaks of pink and gold as dawn broke fully. It was the kind of morning Thomas had always loved, the world remade and beautiful. But the boat told a different story. The mast was split and useless, hanging at an angle like a broken bone. The deck was littered with debris, torn canvas, splintered wood, coils of rope transformed into chaotic tangles. Water sloshed in the bilge more than should be there. They'd survived, but the constellation was badly wounded. Claire stirred, opening her eyes and wincing as she moved. "We're alive," she said, making it half question, half wonder. "We're alive," Vincent confirmed. He helped her stand, and together they assessed the damage. It was extensive but not catastrophic. The hull remained intact, the rudder still functioned, and most critically, the emergency radio still had power. Vincent activated it and sent out a distress signal, including their approximate position based on his best guess of where the storm had pushed them. While they waited for rescue, they worked to make the boat more stable. Claire proved surprisingly capable with repairs, her hands steady as she helped Vincent secure the broken mast and clear the deck. They worked mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable silence now, the kind shared by people who've been through something profound together. "My research station is probably gone," Claire said eventually, staring out at the water. 5 years of work destroyed in one night. "I should feel devastated, but—" She paused, searching for words. "I mostly feel relieved, like I've been given permission to stop hiding." Vincent understood exactly what she meant. He looked at the damaged boat, this vessel he'd poured 3 years of his life into, trying to preserve something that was already gone. The constellation would never be what she was in Thomas's dreams. She was something else now, marked by survival instead of perfection. "I've been restoring this boat like it was a museum piece," he admitted, trying to make everything exactly as it was, as if getting it right would bring Thomas back. But that's not how life works. Things change. People change, and that's not betrayal. It's just living. Claire moved closer to him, their shoulders touching. Jonas would have loved this storm. The crazy bastard would have been thrilled by the challenge. He always said that the best moments in life were the ones that scared you enough to make you feel truly alive. She smiled sadly. "I've been so busy being scared of dying like he did that I forgot about the alive part." The radio crackled to life. A Coast Guard cutter had received their distress signal and was en route. Estimated time of arrival, 3 hours. Vincent acknowledged and provided updates on their condition. Help was coming. They were going to make it. They spent the waiting time in the cabin, finally dry and warm, wrapped in blankets and sharing the emergency rations Vincent had stocked, granola bars and canned soup heated over a small camping stove. Claire told him about her research, about coral reefs dying in slow motion and ocean temperatures rising, and the desperate race to understand what humanity was doing before it was too late. Vincent told her about his years in aerospace engineering, about building systems that had to work perfectly because failure meant death, and how retirement had left him feeling purposeless until he'd found the boat. "What will you do now?" Claire asked. "I mean, the boat's going to need serious repairs. Will you still restore her?" Vincent considered this. The honest answer was yes, but not in the way he'd been doing. Not as a shrine to the past, but as something functional, something meant to be used. I'll fix her, he said slowly, but differently. Not trying to make her perfect or keep her frozen in time, just seaworthy. Ready to sail again. Where would you sail? He looked at her, really looked at her, seeing not just the oceanographer who'd risked her life for data, but the woman who'd held steady through impossible circumstances, who'd lost someone she loved and was trying to figure out how to open her heart again, just like him. I don't know yet, he said honestly, but I think I'd like company, if you're interested. Claire's eyes widened slightly, then softened. I don't know if I'm ready for, it's only been, I know, Vincent interrupted gently. It's too soon for both of us. And maybe it'll always be too soon, but maybe that's not what matters. Maybe what matters is being willing to try, to choose the voyage even when you can't see the destination. She was quiet for a long moment, then reached out and took his hand. Her palm was calloused from years of field work, scarred and strong. It fit perfectly with his. My apartment in the city is probably fine. The hurricane wouldn't have reached that far inland, but I don't think I want to go back there. To that life, alone in a sterile apartment, married to my work because I was too scared to be married to a person. The boathouse has a spare room, Vincent offered. It's not much, but it's yours if you want it. While we figure things out, no pressure, just company. Company, Claire repeated, testing the word. Then she smiled, really smiled, for the first time since he'd met her. I'd like that. The Coast Guard cutter arrived exactly on schedule, a beautiful sight against the horizon. They were rescued, checked by paramedics, wrapped in thermal blankets, and given hot coffee that tasted like heaven. The Constellation was taken in tow, wounded but afloat. As Port Meridian came into view hours later, Vincent was shocked by the devastation. Whole sections of the waterfront were simply gone, buildings reduced to splinters, docks torn away, boats piled on top of each other like toys. His boathouse still stood miraculously, though missing half its roof and listing slightly to one side. It was salvable, which was more than many had. The recovery took months. Vincent and Claire fell into a rhythm, working side by side to repair the boathouse and the boat. She moved into the spare room as planned, which gradually became less spare and more lived in. They cooked together in the evenings. She was indeed an excellent cook, transforming basic ingredients into meals that made the boathouse feel like a home. They talked for hours about everything and nothing, learning each other's histories and habits and hopes. Claire's data had survived in its waterproof case, and she worked with universities to continue her research remotely, using Port Meridian as a new base. The dying reefs became her mission, but no longer her only purpose. Vincent consulted part-time for a marine engineering firm, surprised to find he missed using his technical skills for more than just restoration work. And slowly, carefully, like two ships learning to sail in formation, they drew closer. The first time Vincent kissed Claire, it was on the deck of the Constellation at sunset, 4 months after the hurricane. She'd been showing him a report about recovery in the local reef system, and he'd realized he was more interested in watching her face light up than in reading about coral polyps. When he leaned in, she met him halfway. "Is this okay?" he asked, suddenly nervous as a teenager. "It's terrifying," she admitted, "but the best things usually are." 6 months after Hurricane Ophelia, the Constellation was seaworthy again. Not perfect. She bore her scars visibly, patches of new wood against old replacement rigging that didn't quite match the original. But she was whole, functional, ready to sail. Vincent and Claire stood on the dock looking at her with pride. "So," Claire said, "where should we go first?" Vincent pulled out a folded chart, one that Thomas had marked years ago with all the places they'd planned to visit. He'd added some new marks in different colored ink, places Claire had mentioned wanting to see. The Greek islands were still there, but so were research sites in the Caribbean, the Great Barrier Reef, the kelp forests of California. "How about we start close and work our way out?" he suggested. "Test our sea legs on some coastal runs before we commit to crossing oceans." "Practical," Claire approved. "Very engineering-minded of you. I learned from an oceanographer that sometimes you have to respect the sea and work with it instead of fighting." They spent the next hour preparing for a short voyage, Just an overnight trip down the coast to a protected cove, Claire knew. As they worked, neighbors stopped by to wish them well. Old Miguel brought a bottle of rum for good luck. The harbor master, rebuilt office and all, gave them an updated weather report. Clear skies, calm seas, perfect conditions. Just before they cast off, Vincent paused. He'd commissioned something from a local craftsman, and it had finally arrived that morning. He pulled it from his bag, a new name plaque for the boat, beautifully carved from reclaimed wood that had washed up after the hurricane. Claire read it aloud. Constellation 2. For all we've lost and all we've found. Her voice caught on the last words. It's perfect. Together they mounted it on the stern, replacing the old plaque. Vincent ran his hand over the letters one last time, feeling Thomas's presence not as a weight but as a blessing, permission to move forward while still honoring the past. They cast off as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose. The Constellation 2 moved smoothly through calm water, her sails catching a gentle breeze. Vincent stood at the helm while Claire adjusted the lines, both of them working in practiced synchronization. As the harbor fell away behind them and the open ocean stretched ahead, Vincent felt something shift inside his chest. Not the absence of grief. That would always be there, a quiet companion, but the presence of something new, hope, possibility. The understanding that love didn't have to be once in a lifetime, that hearts were remarkably resilient things, capable of breaking and healing and daring to open again. Claire came to stand beside him, sliding her arm around his waist. He pulled her close, and they stood together as the boat cut through gentle swells, carrying them toward a horizon neither could see, but both were brave enough to sail toward. Thank you, Claire said quietly, for pulling me out of that research station, for being stubborn enough to stay, for giving me a reason to stop hiding. Thank you, Vincent replied, for reminding me that restoration isn't about preservation. It's about renewal. The sun touched the water, spreading gold across the waves. Somewhere beneath them, Claire's reefs were slowly recovering, proving that even ecosystems pushed to the brink could find their way back with time and care. Somewhere, above them, stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky, constellations that had guided sailors for thousands of years and would guide them still. The Constellation 2 sailed on, no longer a monument to what was lost, but a vessel for what could be found. Two people who'd thought their sailing days were over discovering that sometimes life gives you one last voyage when you least expect it. And that one voyage, one chance, one boat, one unlikely love born from stubbornness and survival, was enough to rebuild everything. Behind them, the lights of Port Meridian twinkled like earthbound stars. Ahead, the ocean stretched infinite and dark and full of possibility. Vincent adjusted their heading slightly, feeling the boat respond beneath his hands. Claire laughed at something, maybe the dolphins that had appeared alongside them, or maybe just the sheer improbable joy of being alive and together on the water. The last light faded from the sky, and the true stars emerged, brilliant and countless. Vincent recognized some constellations and invented names for others, pointing them out to Claire, who countered with scientific designations that he immediately forgot. It didn't matter. What mattered was this: the boat beneath them, the water around them, the vast sky above them, and the choice they'd made to sail forward together into whatever came next. One ship, one chance, one love found in the wreckage of two others. It was enough. It was everything. The Constellation 2 sailed into the night, carrying two survivors toward new horizons, proving that even in humanity's darkest storms, one vessel of hope and courage is enough to weather anything, and that the greatest voyages are the ones we never plan to take.